Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Live Through That, the podcast where I talk to influential musicians from the 80s, 90s, and beyond. I'm Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we'll dig a little deeper into a pivotal moment into the lives of some of the artists I feature in my books, Live Through That and 80s Redux, as well as artists whom I love and respect. This week's guest is singer, songwriter, poet, artist, and writer Debora Iyall from the early 80s band Romeo Void. Debora started the band while at the San Francisco Art Institute and quickly became an item in the local music scene. You know them from their iconic hits A Girl in Trouble is a Temporary Thing and Never Say Never. Debora was a true groundbreaker in the music world and continues to break new ground with her art these days. Today she tells us about the time she ran away from home when she was 13 years old.
Well, I started junior high in an awkward position. Some racial discrimination had begun happening with my social group in sixth grade. So this would be seventh grade in the olden days when we had junior high. And that was difficult enough, I think, for me to process because, the kids that I had hung out with started acting different. I was confronted at a baseball game. Well, what are you anyway? Meaning, what's my ethnicity? And I said, very proudly, I'm American Indian. And they said back to me, I wouldn't be proud. And then another incident happened, which is one of my longtime friends I'd probably known since, third grade, hung out with, had a big party at the end of the year at her house with all of our friends. And I didn't get invited. So it was 1967. And over the summer, I had read about the hippies in Haight-Ashbury and the whole social movement going on with the alternative lifestyles and lack of conformity in thought, word, and deed, and fashion and everything. And I was very exhilarated by that. I started making my own granola and steaming vegetables and things like that, doing my own tie-dye and making candles in the sand with driftwood and things like that. So I was already like 100% kind of bought into kind of the hippie thing. That's what it was termed anyway. To me, it was always just very alternative. And when I went back to school, one of the first things I did was I showed up at school with an Indian headband on my head, sideways, because kids wear headbands all the time, but not across your forehead. And I got kicked out of school for that, like sent home for the day. And I was a kid who was an AB student. I was kind of one of the smart kids. And this was a shock to me and kind of just another blow at how people saw me different. And now things were different now that I was in junior high. And I was very unhappy about that. My mother instilled in me lots of values for independent thought. She was a veterinarian who graduated not second in her class, but she was in a class of 102. She was one of the only two women who graduated with a veterinarian certificate or degree. And so she was a progressive, a free thinker. I was reading Herman Hesse and Animal House that were her books. And then I just would read what she was reading. And she liked poetry. She took us to see Hair. She took us to see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when it was in a black box theater in San Francisco. And so she was on my side, but she was a single mom raising 4 kids. So there was nothing that she was capable of doing to react to the school doing that except accept it like I had to. And then another incident that happened at school, and this was all in the first few weeks of school, was I had written the words to get together, come on, people now, smile on your brother. And I'd written those lyrics on my spelling book, which was a book you had to buy at the beginning of the year. It was like a workbook. And I got kicked out of school for that. Like, not just told you're going to have to buy a new book or anything, but just like literally sent home, sent out of class. Discipline incident. And so for both of these incidents, my mom's at work being a veterinarian, and she sends over one of the guys who work in the kennels to come and pick me up and take me home. And so I think I felt very unsupported. And like, this is your cross to bear now. This is what life is going to be like. And one Sunday night, my whole family had gathered in the living room. I'm going to start crying. So if my voice starts cracking a little bit, just like know that this really was a pivotal thing in my life. My whole family had gathered in the living room to watch, and I looked at them from outside. There was a window that faced the living room from the room I was in, the bedroom. And I could see them all sitting there. I felt completely isolated by that. And I decided I was going to run away to San Francisco. This was on Sunday night. So I had a lot of courage and gumption and know-how, as a 13-year-old. I had made that summer working for my mom at her veterinary hospital. I'd made over $100, which was a lot of money. And, when I was in 1967, that was a pretty big amount of money especially for a 13-year-old kid. And I had been saving them to buy some cowboy boots because we had horses. And I, of course, wanted a nice pair of cowboy boots for my hard-earned money. And I thought, I'm going to fly to San Francisco. And I called the airline. I got a reservation. I called a cab, had it meet me half a block away at the corner, left the house during the Smothers Brothers, went out to the airport with no luggage. I had like my pea coat on over a pair of cutoffs and a surfer shirt. It's funny, we remember what we're wearing. And no one thought a thing of it. When I was in line at the ticket thing, they kind of looked at me like, no luggage. And I said, my family left earlier. Like, they had my luggage. So they let me on the plane, and I ran away from Fresno, California to San Francisco. And I got into the airport, and I'm like, what do I do now? And by that time, it was like 10 o'clock at night, probably, because I don't know what time the Smothers Brothers came on, but I think it was like around 7. All this happened pretty quickly. And I just started wandering around the airport, and I noticed this group of hippie kids, long-haired, couple of girls, couple of guys. One was like mixed race, African-American, real kind of Sly and the Family Stone fashion vibe. So I started following them around, and they were just wandering around the airport. So of course we noticed each other, and I went up to them and I said, are you guys perhaps going into San Francisco? Because I pretty much sussed out that, San Francisco airport was not in San Francisco, and it really isn't. And plus I didn't know where I was going to go when I got there anyway. And they were like, oh yeah, you can come with us. And it turns out what they were doing is their friend, the Sly and the Family Stone fashion guy, was going to fly back to Chicago after spending the summer in San Francisco to rejoin his family and, quote unquote, kind of go straight again, And he wasn't able to get on the plane. He just couldn't go, So my watching him walk around was him just basically chickening out on leaving San Francisco. So we all piled into this Volkswagen Bug. And so I made like 5 people in the Bug. And they're like, well, where are you going? I said, I don't know. I just ran away. And I couldn't have met people who were more sympathetic to my situation, honestly. And they didn't quite know what to do with me. But they were driving around Haight-Ashbury a little bit. They went to one of their friends' houses to see if maybe I could stay there. And it was funny because they went running up the stairs, this old Victorian, and the guy who answers the door is naked, and I can see him, and I'm like, oh my God, where am I? It's a long way from Fresno. And I guess, they weren't interested in taking a 13-year-old runaway in that night. And by this time, it's probably midnight. So they're like, oh, we know where you can go. We'll take you to the switchboard, which was a community service. And I don't know if they had like a radio station involved with the switchboard, but it was definitely one of those places where you could call to get help and stuff like that. And it was just this little office in like a front room of a flat with a bathroom attached. And that's where people answered the calls for, probably drug overdoses or depression or suicide attempts. Who knows, what all the people were calling about to the switchboard. And they dropped me off there. And the people at the switchboard were kind of like, what's going on? And they're like, well, you know what? It's really late at night now. Just sleep on this. They had like a day bed situation, just like covered with plaid upholstery material, and they're just like, lay down there and sleep and we'll figure it out in the morning. And they welcomed me to Haight-Ashbury. And then the next morning I went over to a house in a big old Victorian called Huckleberries for Runaways. And I stayed there a few days before my family and I were reunited. Basically, the Huckleberries found out that they were looking for me and the police were looking for me. So I went back to Fresno. But that was a really crucial part of my life and my decision, and me having to step up for myself and be courageous and, acknowledge my situation and want to change it.
After her mother found her and brought her back home to Fresno, things really weren't any better at school for Debora.
I was very much ostracized in school. I had a boy, within an hour of me arriving at school, tell me, well, I'm surprised to see you here. We heard you were dead. And I was like, okay. And then once I'd done that, I was kind of notorious in a not necessarily good way. And all the quote unquote kids that I used to hang out with, my, social group that was kind of like rejecting me anyway, I feel like for pretty much racial, reasons, they made it really clear I wasn't really one of them. And so my options were, they were like asking me, well, why don't you hang out with the Mexicans? Which, maybe somebody who is Mexican, that would make sense. But, my mom was Anglo. My dad was Native American. He was out of the picture since I was 2.5 years old. So, even though I am Native American, I wasn't raised by him and he wasn't in the picture. And there isn't a huge population of Native American kids in Fresno City schools anyway. So I remember trying to hang out with Mexicans and like not speaking Spanish and culturally not having that much in common, but like it was somebody to hang out with. And then one of the girls that I hung out with, her brother gave her a bunch of Seconal, and she showed up at my house when my mom was there on Seconal, like practically drooling. So it was like a whole new world. And so I quit high school when I was 16, the minute it was legal for me to do so.
Debora eventually went back to school and earned a master's in education and taught art for many years in Southern California. Today, she's still making music and art as well as working on a memoir of her life that will hopefully see the light of day in 2024. She's also keeping busy doing voiceovers for a show called Spirit Rangers, among others. You can also see her in the Epix documentary series Women Who Rock. And going back to our roots on the show, Debora gives us some recommendations of things that have recently inspired her.
So I have 5 things that have been a really positive influence on me and that I hold close to my heart. One of them is the movie Whale Rider. It came out in 2002. It was written and directed by Nikki Caro, based on a novel called The Whale Rider by Witi Imahara. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. I believe it's a Maori name. It's just an amazing tale and a beautiful film, beautifully acted, great characters, a lot of sort of very essential lessons this prepubescent, going into pubescent girl has to overcome and confront as she's growing older, and sex roles are defined in her culture at that time, and how she ends up kind of upending that and yet really being a super positive influence on her community. So it's really a fantastic film. Whale Rider, 2002, written and directed by Nikki Caro. Another thing that always I loved was Billie Holiday, the singing of Billie Holiday. And in particular, the song God Bless the Child, which she wrote in 1939. I really just like the whole idea of money, you've got lots of friends, right? The lyrics are very straightforward. But when it's gone and spending ends, they don't come round no more, you know? It's a great song, God Bless the Child. An album that I love, and I actually have owned it on cassette, 8-track, and now as an album, is Laura Nero's Christmas and the Beads of Sweat. She's put out an amazing amount of songs over her lifetime, covered by all kinds of artists, including Barbra Streisand and the Fifth Dimension, hits. But she writes very personal music as well. And that particular album is just powerful. And I can listen to it from start to finish. I'm still in love with it after all these years. I got it when it came out. I'm actually not sure when that was. In the 70s. And last but not least, I have read a lot of novels in my life, and short stories as well. Tilly Olsen, I'm thinking, is one short story writer I really like. But my favorite novel writer, really, at this point I can say, is probably Louise Erdrich, who is half Native American and half German, Dutch, English, you know, that kind of thing, mostly German, I think. And she's from the Midwest. We were born in the same year, and I actually got to read poetry ahead of one of her readings in San Francisco, probably about 25 or 30 years ago. So I got to meet her at that point, and just everything she puts out, it has really high quality and engaging. And I don't know, I can just really relate to her observations and insights about behavior and culture and time and what we inherit, from our ancestors, whether they're German butchers or Native American grandmothers.
Thank you, Debora, for telling your story. And a friendly reminder that you can also buy my book, Live Through That, on 90s Artists and get 15% off using the promo code PODCAST15 by ordering at the link on the podcast page. In addition, my earlier book, 80s Redux, is available wherever you buy your books, and you can see more about Debora in that book. If you like the show, please subscribe so you'll know when the latest episode comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Mike Hipple Photo, all one word. Thanks for listening.